Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Psychedelics Weekly with Kyle and Joe. How you doing today, Kyle?
Not too bad, Joe. How are you doing today?
Pretty reasonable. Yeah, things are moving. Is this the first full day of spring we're recording? 322.
Think so. I think it was on the 20th was the equinox. So yeah,
Right
happy
on. So
happy
maybe
spring,
yesterday.
everybody.
Yeah, we made it. Things are gonna melt. Things are gonna get better.
Sun is returning.
Yeah, a lot we could say on the solar stuff, but we'll keep it moving. um, so yeah, today I just want to give a shout out. We're doing a giveaway with Beckley Retreats. You can win a custom Beckley Retreat tote, one-on-one meditation class with Neil Markey, who is just on the podcast this last Tuesday, as well as a 60-minute career coaching session with the co-founders of Dose Connect, some Canna microdose supplements from Hearthstone Collective, a tea bundle from Brothers Apothecary, deep meditation and lucid dream supplement from Magi Ancestral Supplements. They got my attention there. Love to try that. A copy of our trip journal and integration workbook, big sellers over here at PT. If you haven't checked those out, please do. And the big prize, our Navigating Psychedelics for Clinicians and Therapists online course. It's been our flagship course for years and years before Vital came out. 47 hours. Amazing. A lot of material that you go through on your own, and then you come together for 9 weeks, or traditionally you come together for 9 weeks and do that. This one is all pre-recorded, but you get access to some really cool community as a result. I think retail on that's around $1,000 US. So head to the link in our bio on socials, or go to psychedelicstoday.com/welcome, or on the show notes for this episode. Yeah, so check that stuff out. I'm trying to think if there's anything else coming up. Yeah, you and I are having an interesting trip to LA. We'll report back on that later.
Yep.
What else is going
We
on?
also have we have an upcoming neuroscience course actually with Dr. Melanie Pincus and Manesh Gurn, which Manesh has been on the podcast before. So definitely go back and check out his work. And this is called the Psychedelic Neuroscience Demystified: How Psychedelics Alter Consciousness and Produce Therapeutic Effects. And so this will be a hybrid course as well, where you get the pre-recorded material and then meet live for 8 weeks. And this kicks off on, I believe, May 17th now. And you can learn more at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And up until, I think, April 12th, there's a special early bird pricing there.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah.
Cool. And then at the time people will be listening to this on Friday, I believe Vital signups are still open. If you want to apply to join us for this 12-month really intense journey, exploring yourself, the field, and more, please do come over and sign up. What's the website there? Vitalpsychedelictraining.com.
Yeah, vitalpsychedelictraining.com. Yeah, and applications will completely close off on the 26th.
Yeah, so if you're hearing this on Friday, you've got only a few more days to check it out. And please do check that out. It's been transformational for so many people in our world. So we would love to help support you through that. Yeah. Cool. So first up, really kind of a sad article here. Field Trip put this up. Psychedelic Alpha put some stuff up about it. Field Trip effectively, had to cease operations. It looks like they've stopped trading on the Canadian Stock Exchange or wherever they were. Did they make? I don't even actually remember what exchange they were on. I think it was still a Canadian exchange.
I think so too.
Yeah. So they've filed for creditor protection under the CCAA, which is kind of probably the Canadian bankruptcy law. Looks like Ronan Levy resigned his position as CEO, and they've put in place it's a term I hadn't heard before, chief restructuring officer. Keith Merker, I think, was the person that got applied for that.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely a tough scene. A lot of people are out of work, and it's not great.
Yeah. Another kind of sad news within psychedelic business. But it sounds like they're also going to be keeping open some of their clinics, right? And I also did see that, they did reach out to clients. I saw a post a while ago. They're like, at least Field Trip reached out and let their clients know that this was happening, versus some other places in the news that just shut down and didn't tell anybody.
We'll get to that in a little bit. Yeah, it's a tough one. Yeah, it's really scary to see this happening. But that said, it shows that, just because this is psychedelic business, it doesn't mean it's, immortal or something, or we don't have to actually follow traditional business rules. Like we still need to worry about bottom line. We still need to worry about making a profit, keeping people paid, good plans. Yeah. So, it's a tough one. They made a lot of big bets, right? Like Field Trip was trying to do a real lot. I don't totally understand the why. As we dig deeper, we'll, share what we think is okay to share. Yeah. So it's a tough one. Tough one. And, I hope people can get decent placements elsewhere in the industry.
Yeah. 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 They had a lot of kind of different arms that they were going on. They had their clinics, their research arm. I know they were doing stuff down in Jamaica. So it's, yeah, I mean, they had some big plans. So this is sad that to see this happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess let's move on to actually the next one. So Ketamine Wellness Centers, just to keep it on the ketamine theme. They were a big chain of clinics. I think we got to meet some of them way back
I think so too, at an
pre-acquisition, right?
Arizona conference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were decent folks, and it was really interesting to learn from them. Delic Corp, Delic Holdings, acquired KWC, Ketamine Wellness Centers, in 2021. A couple of years after we met the folks there. I think that was early 2019, maybe.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah. And they are all shut down as of March 17. They can't, I guess Delic couldn't meet the financial demands amidst rapid expansion. So KWC employees were let go on Friday. Little no explanation. Many worried about rent coming up. But yeah, in the article here on azfamily.com, it's an Arizona family website, kind of probably a news website. They said they're worried about rent. Yeah, and they had a particular person they were recording with or interviewed there for that. Yeah, it was tough. Like no warning was really given. It just came out of nowhere, which honestly does happen in business sometimes. It really sucks. Like all of a sudden you can't really turn it around, and you tried, but you just couldn't make it work. And then people do get surprised. It's a real bummer. So, one big issue is that I guess some people haven't been able to get their medical records. That said, it's only been a few days. Like I've at times had to wait weeks to get medical records. Have you ever had that problem?
I mean, sometimes it does take a while, right? You like file a bunch of paperwork and then all their kind of internal admin taking a bit. But this actually, I believe, happened at another ketamine clinic, and they had multiple clinics. And I forget the name of it, but they were located in Princeton, New Jersey, right outside of Princeton. And they just closed up. They were under new ownership, or they had like a CEO come in. I think they expanded really quickly, and then just totally kind of folded. And I think people still had, they had issues getting medical records and stuff like that. From what I heard from some clients and stuff over there when that happened. So I don't know. It brings up just interesting questions around expanding too quickly in this space when maybe the market demand isn't completely there. And as we talked about maybe last week around accessibility with some of this treatment, and maybe it's like trying to be too far in the future, and trying to expand too quickly. So I think it's something to be aware of.
Classic gamble, right? Like, of course, there's massive advantages to being the first mover, but there's always the chance you're too early and you trip, and it's tough. But it's a gamble a lot of people make, and I totally get the intent and the allure of that, right? Like you and I have done that a few times. But it's always like a little scary and stressful because you never know how it's going to shake out.
Yeah. It's all about kind of like that risk management and seeing like what you're able to like take on, and okay, is this a good move or not? But yeah, I feel like a lot of this news just kind of happened so quickly in the past week, right? Like Field Trip, Synthesis, Ketamine Wellness. And I don't know how people are feeling in the space, but I can imagine that it's really kind of shaking people up of like, is there a future? Or like, what is the hope of psychedelic treatment now that like a bunch of these like, companies are starting to either fold or cut corners? Like I think last week we chatted a little bit about Cybin having some cuts as well. So yeah, I'm just wondering how everybody's feeling out there with all this news as well.
And I'll insert some realism too, right? Like a lot of people probably invested, maybe didn't do enough diligence. A lot of these businesses, took a lot of money from folks. And we can see this across all publicly traded companies and probably many private as well, that these things just kind of got a free pass because it was a psychedelic topic. I think a lot of the investors were not traditional medical and or biotech investors. And they just assumed, oh, this will work just like my Microsoft stock. It just keeps going up. It's like,
Right.
well, like you got to really, know what you're gambling on, right? And it's hard, but it's always going to be a gamble, right? It's not.
Totally.
There's no free passes here in investing in business.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna go forward, like really study this stuff, really get deep, like, and find some people to mentor you, right? If you're gonna take this investment
Yeah.
approach, like.
I was just thinking, I don't know, it was like a few years ago, probably, we were just chatting about psychedelic business, and it feels like, people were investing like this is a normal business, and it's kind of not, right? Like, I kept, a few years ago, we kept hearing like, this is cannabis 2.0. And it's going to totally operate differently, right? I mean, we bring up the issues around accessibility, how expensive this is, how much treatment does somebody need, how many times is somebody going to get this treatment. So thinking about like maybe traditional business models where you're trying to, have products or services all the time and have like repeat customers, that may not be the case with psychedelics, right? Might be, somebody goes to a retreat and they're good for a year, 2 years, or, they have a few, treatments and it might be too expensive and then they can't continue treatment again. So I think this type of treatment and the companies, it's just, it doesn't feel like just normal business, right? It's a little bit different than cannabis, where some people do consume it every day, multiple times a day, right? And that's a product that can, continuously be sold. And I'm sure, the microdosing field, you will have those products that are sold pretty regularly. But, traditional kind of psychedelic experiences, how often can you sell them? So it brings up interesting questions.
Right. And we've heard rumor that a lot of retreats, like you're only getting somebody once, like you have minimal to zero return business. And that's really hard for retreats. And, there's a lot of reasons for that. Yeah. So I would just say be careful when investing. I don't think the field as a whole is going to stop. Like I think we're going to hit a little bit of a slowdown on account of like money being harder to come into businesses, but really I think everything's going to proceed as scheduled. Like I don't see MAP slowing down, Compass, Atai, like a lot of these other businesses like Cybin probably, like they had some layoffs recently, I guess too, I saw in the headlines, like, but I don't think we're going to really see a lot of these groups totally stop their development process.
No, I don't think so, right? I think it's a huge learning process too for some people that just like really entered into the space and maybe got excited about the hype, and really wanting to kind of ride that. And yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are just learning a ton about the space, and it's totally new, right? So that's something I think we always have to remind each other about, that this is a new space and there's going to be lots of ups and downs. There's going to be the highs and then things are going to come crashing down. And it's just the nature of reality, right? There's always that ebb and flow.
In some places are really volatile, right? Like so just be careful. Like investment is not like something you should take lightly, especially if you're not in a great financial position anyway. Yeah. So be careful, like, and just learn, like, especially if money is a concern of yours. So yeah, I think even if you don't think money's a concern of yours, you probably should also still get educated. Just like, yeah, we're all spiritual entities, but we also have nervous systems. We also have bank accounts that keep the nervous systems healthy too. So, we've got to really think holistically about our health.
Yeah.
Who would have thought finances played into that?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does, right? To some degree, we want to escape like the capitalistic model, but we also live in it, and just the reality that we live in. As much as I would love to escape from it, it's also, you still got bills to pay and still have to feed yourself and do all those fun things. Yeah, before ecstasy, take the trash out, do the dishes. After ecstasy, take the trash out, do the dishes. It's part of life, right?
Yep. For now.
For now, yeah.
So next up, our friends over at Psychedelic Medicine Coalition helped spring up a new organization, a political action committee, PAC. So this is a headline from NBCnews.com. We obviously heard a little early about this one, but the press release came out on Monday of this week. Headline: candidates who support psychedelics as medicine will get a political action committee. Psychedelic Medicine PAC will focus on securing federal funding for more research on how magic mushrooms, ketamine, and similar substances can treat various disorders. Yeah, I think this is super important. And I don't remember if we even talked about our trip to DC that we played a part in yet.
No, I was going to ask you about that. I don't think we did
Yeah.
chat about that last week. Yeah, what happened in DC? Why were you there?
So, Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, Melissa Lavasani is the head there. She put together a day on the Hill where we had tons of appointments with staffers of congressmen and Congress people, and we just educated folks. And we hit our appointments, like had really extensive, powerful meetings with folks. Like I heard some really powerful stories coming out of the staffers themselves.
Mm.
Like obviously Washington, D.C., it's probably a really stressful place to live, especially if you work in politics. So I would imagine there's a lot of users there. And then what I was really impressed with was, the personal testimony that people would give back to us. They're probably not supposed to, but it was really great to hear it. And, life-saving, literally life-saving. And there's no way to say it otherwise. Like you have to.
And
say
who
it
else
that
was
way.
there? There was Rick Doblin, Matt Johnson, and a few others.
Yep. Rick Doblin was running around. He had a bunch of film folks on him. He played part of I guess backing up the tape, like there was also a briefing. PMC put on a briefing. So they had like the biggest auditorium, I think, in that whole complex of buildings, Congress, the Capitol. And we had Rick on stage, Rick Doblin, Matt Johnson, Wiz Buckley from No Fallen Soldiers, I think. Or No One, yeah. I wish I knew the name of his organization. But Wiz Buckley was really cool. He's a Navy Top Gun instructor, pilot. Yeah, No Fallen Heroes Foundation is the name of his group. And they're doing stuff similar to Vets and Heroic Hearts, like connecting veterans to access, which I think is extraordinarily important. Yeah. And he's doing it from like the fighter pilot Navy perspective. Yeah. And he's working. I don't know if this is public, but he's working to get female leadership in place there. So it'd be kind of the first female-led veteran nonprofit that I've seen. And I think that's a big deal. Yeah. So he was running around. Jesse Gould from Heroic Hearts was there. That was really good. And Tim Ferriss zoomed in. It was a really funny scene. Did you see the photos of this? Like he's on the big screen and everybody's like looking back at him. But it was South by Southwest. I imagine he just didn't have time to go to DC because it was South by. But it was a really well attended session, apparently. Like it's very rare to get that many folks in attendance, especially when Congress is in session. They're all busy. So that was great. And then, we just kind of ran around, took a lot of meetings. I was there with Victor Cabral from Fluence, running around with him a little bit too. And it was heartening to just see how you could tell a straightforward story and educate these people and perhaps influence laws and science funding.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, do you feel like this had an impact on anybody? And like, what were some of those key takeaways?
Yeah, 100%. Like, so the talk track was the feds need to start funding science on this topic. The drug war has made it so that there's been very minimal funding from the feds. As a result, like, we get a lot of private funding, which kind of can be biased, right? Like, Pfizer puts out some research. You're like, okay, great. Thanks, Pfizer. But how do I know you didn't bury 100 studies before this one came out? Because, that's somehow allowed in our drug development process. So, and we're seeing similar stuff at times with psychedelic research groups, I think. And we'll get into an article on that in a moment. But yeah, it's obvious that we need government money dedicated to this. More people than ever are using. Traditional psychiatric interventions don't perform as well as people want them to. Sometimes they're really ugly. Like I heard of somebody the other day getting 36 ECT sessions. I'm like, okay, that's horrifying. Like that's not great. And, what do we do? Like imagine if one MDMA session or psilocybin session could have taken the place of all that and maybe outperformed it. We don't have clear data yet. So like, that's the hope. But yeah, I had a friend go sign up for ECT. I don't even know if I told you that. And I was like, can you please like try to connect with some people in the underground first? Or like, please? Because ECT is like horrifying to me.
I know the technology's changed and I've talked to some providers that say, it works for some people, but Yeah, I think when I think about it, I think about like the craziness from the videos from back in the day when they used to do that.
Hmm. Yeah, they're able to use much lower voltage. Like the damage is much less severe, but there is still damage, right? Like, yes, it might be helpful, but it also might not be. And you could have some serious implications on your short term memory and a bunch of other things. So, like, people should be evaluating all options, including illegal options, in my opinion, because the feds have made it a little bit. I don't want to say it's the Fed's fault, right? It's like historically, the federal government has been the main instigator here, stopping science and stopping people from getting help. But there's there are people inside the federal apparatus that are working really hard on this. I can say that.
Yeah.
One thing that we were able to point to is the Breakthrough Therapies Act. I think it was like Booker and Rand Paul or something said anytime something hits, I think we talked about this last time. If you get breakthrough status from the FDA, you're immediately rescheduled so that science becomes cheaper and easier. We'll
Mm,
see if that goes through. They're not exactly mainstream people, and they might be
right.
seen as a little too fringe, but there's a chance. And we educated people to say, hey, like before we get any kind of like appropriations bill in front of you to get some funds, like this one's a good one. And then some other things like FDA, DEA are just kind of waiting for leadership to give them some nods on which direction to go here. They don't
Mm,
necessarily need any kind of official thing, but saying like, hey, FDA, we have your back. That would go pretty far. Similarly with the DEA, like we want to see
yeah.
this move. Like, please go.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd be huge. That'd be really huge.
Hmm. So that was really good. I heard like one meeting was supposed to be 15 minutes, turned into like an hour and a half. And like, emotional processing group at a certain point, which is really, really positive and good. A lot of folks are like, well, I don't know. The congressman won't necessarily bite just based on this story. So we're like, call us, give us, the opportunity to give you more info to help.
I was gonna say, was there a lot of negative talk track there, or still a lot of that stigma of that? So does it feel like things are
When you lead with
shifting?
the data, it's really helpful.
Hmm.
Like we're not necessarily pointing exclusively to MAPS data, but like the Hopkins data is really helpful, especially like, so another thing that came out, and this is actually really sad. I
Mm.
don't know if we even have talked about this yet. Apparently that 22 veteran death a day figure was way low. And there was some more work done. And now the new figure is 45 a day.
Wow.
So they're like all cause suicide, not just like gun to head. It's like a lot of things. And 45 per day. So we have a long way to go. And that figure was really helpful because we were talking to mostly Republican folks.
Hmm.
And when you tell the veteran stories, which I think is really important to tell, like they're being really underserved, and not like this is a new talk track for the feds. Like they know that we're not doing enough for veterans, and we need to do more. And you say that, and people bite. You give them the data on how well some of these things perform, and some of the data, and people are into it.
Mm.
People were just like ready to roll, and you keep suggesting a few additional points, and it can make a difference. So that's Psychedelic Medicine Coalition. It's a nonprofit you can donate to help keep that kind of work going. I can't wait to be able to donate money there. As soon as I can, I will.
Yeah.
And I hope you all consider it too. It's a definitely a big passion of mine, that we might actually be able to change science funding. Like imagine if all of a sudden there was $100 million in science funding available for psychedelics, and how much that would
Be
change.
amazing.
Yeah, right. We don't have to lean on for-profit companies science, right? We can say, okay, let's do this, and maybe we can finally have replicated studies at different sites by different groups, right?
We need that. We need that so badly. Fingers
Yeah, like
crossed.
pretending our data is tight without having replication is not awesome.
Mhm.
It's kind of a big miss. Yeah, and then with the pack, which is a big deal too, people should check that out. Psychedelic Medicine Pack. We're going to get people elected that are into this topic, and we might be able to strategically, get more people in power that are willing to vote positively on the psychedelic topic. So those two things are both really big and I think really important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, I don't know, we probably talked about this before, but just thinking about like, the war on drugs and thinking about public safety, like you figure you'd want to be pouring money into research so we can like really understand this stuff, right? And it's just crazy that like we haven't, it's just like, nope, not doing any of that. And just realizing people are doing all this anyways. And wouldn't it be awesome to have data to make more informed decisions? And if it is about public safety, wouldn't you want that too? Know what's going on with people and like how to best protect people.
From the perspective of public health, like given that there's more people using now than ever, it seems like it's a moral imperative from the government side to say, yeah, we need to understand this so we can know how we need to react, right?
Yeah.
Let's hope.
Fingers crossed. You just got to keep doing the work.
That's it. Like I think if we did this thing in DC we just did again 12, 20 more times, like we would start seeing some serious movement at the federal level. And I think we're already seeing movement. It just takes a little bit of time.
Yeah.
So this next one here, our friends in Australia. I'm going to try to be polite mostly. So title, Serious Concerns Over TGA's Decision Making on Landmark Psilocybin and MDMA Ruling by abc.net.au. It's a big Australian site. I had to look up TGA. Did you have to look up TGA?
I know what it is, but I forget what it stands for.
Therapeutic Goods Association. It's kind of like their FDA, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's really interesting to read about this, right? You're saying like, oh, you actually have it baked into your kind of structure to go slower and don't be a leader. It's kind of interesting, right? Like waiting for the US and EU to lead in some cases before, which is sensible, probably saves you money in a lot of cases. But in this case, it's a really interesting one. MindMed Australia, like they've done some good. They drive me a little crazy, but yeah, like I don't want to work with them. But, they have done a shitload of lobbying on the Australian government. And I think that partly helped. I'm not super sure what happened with where was this mistrust. I think they had some internal guidelines and suggestions, and in the rulemaking process, they just kind of like jumped over it. But, a lot of people were trying to move too fast for some people in the TGA. So they're like, hey, we don't really have clear data that this should be prescribed yet. If we're going by traditional rules, like you need certain kinds of evidence to make it prescribable. In my opinion, yes, we do have plenty of evidence for both MDMA and psilocybin, but some people want all of the hoops jumped through. Like all those kind of basic safety targets, like, is this more effective than other treatments? All that kind of fun stuff. Yeah, so MindMed Australia called on supporters to put in submissions opposing TGA's initial decision of kind of delaying this or pushing back. And I think they sent over 3,000 people responded, 13,000 submissions to the TGA, which is pretty wild. And it's obvious that collective action works and badgering the government works. That said, there were some substantial critiques about MindMed Australia's work, and the government just wanted people to chill out. They're like, hey guys, we're working on it. We're trying. But they didn't really like the tone coming from a lot of the MindMed Australia folks. So I'm curious. Well, I guess to start with what happened here, the TGA approved certain psychiatrists with certain certifications to use MDMA and psilocybin in clinic, MDMA for PTSD, psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. This went through in February. Yeah, and TGA just denied it last October, but now it looks like within 8-9 months, this stuff is going to be a reality in clinics.
I think by July is when they initially said that can go forward under a prescriber rights. And so, yeah, there does seem to be some opposition from some folks in the space just talking about this felt too soon and how we don't have all the data, and all the data that we do have, it's still pretty small. I mean, as you were saying, we need a lot more research, right? And to be able to replicate it. So, some people are thinking that it just happened too quickly. But, as you were saying with MMA and how they have had some impact, reading through the article, and, it did seem like they were on top of some folks, right? There was a quote here just saying, strong lobbying to the point where it was seen over the top. And, quote, they're very passionate about their work, but they badgered a number of our staff. And so, it's interesting. It makes me wonder, did that have an impact of like, the constant work behind and just like sending stuff in. And so, sometimes maybe that does work to just be a squeaky wheel.
Yeah. And, these are the same folks, My Med Australia, that got kind of outed in a documentary by, I think, a big Australian outfit somewhat recently too. Like some big questions got raised, but I guess it really didn't slow them down. Yeah. So, what do we want to think? Like, how do we want to relate to this? It's interesting, right? Like this article outlines that Peter and Tanya Hunt from My Med Australia have like lots of businesses in flow. They say they don't want to make any money off of it, which may or may not be true, but certainly looks like there's some positioning there. And like, I don't know. I'm hopeful that the Australian psychedelic scene will become a lot more diverse. Yeah. And, it shouldn't just be one nonprofit, right? Just like the US, it shouldn't be only MAPS, right? There should be a bunch and an ecosystem of interest being represented. Australia has a really robust psychedelic scene, but for whatever reason, Mind Med Australia was able to get out in front. Yeah. And I'm curious. I'm curious what's going to happen here.
I think we're all curious, yeah. And it was fun to kind of chat with Diego a few episodes back about this when this initially launched, just to kind of get his perspective since he's in Australia. But I think some of those concerns are pretty valid. Like I remember when we heard the news, I was like, "What just happened?" Like that felt like it came out of left field, right? Because it didn't seem like things were moving that quickly in Australia, and to just like hear that happen very quickly, it was like, whoa. And then, just thinking about like, it's giving psychiatrists prescribing rights if they apply for it. Where's the place of like the therapist? Are they able to participate? And I think they're all figuring that stuff out. But I remember that's what some people were like concerned about, and it was like, whoa, and how inaccessible will that be? And they kind of highlight that in the article here, right? So talking that it could be, if it was just the psychiatrists, you're talking maybe $15,000 to $20,000, maybe $30,000 that a therapy could cost if it was just provided by those medical professionals. Because you think about all that time that they need to be in the room. So, hopefully they'll figure that out and see like, where's their role, and have the proper training for therapists to be there. But yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting to see how it all unfolds. And if it does, right? Like we're just even seeing like how long, well, yeah, I mean, like Oregon took 2 years to get all their stuff in place, but things are still delayed, right? So will there be a lot of delays, even though this is supposed to go in effect starting July?
Right. Like there is a good chance we'll see some delays. We'll see how it plays out, right? But this is purely a clinical play. This is not a
right. Yeah.
like Oregon where it's like not so clinical, right?
Right.
Yeah. So I'm really interested. I'm curious. Like, and I hope that we can help a little bit too. Yeah. And so some concerns that were highlighted, the committee had reservations about listing these drugs as medicine, lack of established therapeutic value, little evidence presented. So maybe it wasn't pitched properly, or perhaps people just have, different levels of requirements for this, right? Like the naturalistic use in the 80s didn't count in 70s. Like there was a lot of therapy being done and very few people getting hurt in this underground scene. So, this is the same thing that we talked about a bunch. Like contemporary science is totally ignoring the history because they don't really know how to fit that historical science into their frame, their new scientific framework, right? As a result, we're repeating studies. It's not all that interesting or exciting. We're not making as much, novel breakthroughs as we could. But it's because science changed. People require different kinds of science. We don't have a lot of phase 3 trial results yet. That was a big issue, I think, for them. Yeah, and the Australian Medical Association, I guess, continues to oppose this. So it's kind of a big deal. It's a big opposition. And I don't know how extreme their opposition is, but perhaps it's substantial. Yeah. TGA's expert committee warned that downscheduling would be incredibly difficult to regulate and enforce at state and territory levels. So I don't super understand that. I don't just making something less regulated. Well, you're having to add new drugs to your pharmacy, your pharmacies. I don't really understand how that works with like downscheduling because it should theoretically be, I don't know. What do you think?
I was kind of curious around that too. And it makes me wonder if downscheduling, if people kind of see that as like a free for all and people just start doing it because they feel like the law has changed. I mean, we hear this all the time too, like when, outside the medical context though, of, oh, like this got decriminalized, so this is legal, right? And people just assuming that right off the bat. And so, with that, like even here in Jersey, and I brought this up in the last episode or episode before, how they changed the law from dropping an ounce of mushrooms that contain psilocybin down from a felony to a misdemeanor. But when that first got released, everybody assumed that it was somewhat legal all of a sudden. In the way that the news broke to it. And so I don't know, when I was reading that's the first thing that kind of popped into my head. Or, do therapists feel that they can prescribe all of a sudden they feel more comfortable doing underground work? And they're like, I'm just going to take this into my own hands and treat PTSD because now it's, approved, even though they might not be a prescriber, but maybe, people could take that into consideration and think about it. So, how do they govern that if people are doing that, or if a prescriber doesn't get authority to prescribe, right? Because I think they have to go through a special process to get permission, but they're just kind of dispensing and prescribing MDMA or psilocybin. I mean, I'm really interested to even know where they're going to be getting it from or how that's going to work. Like,
I've heard that Peter and Tanya DeJong had some sort of like import scheme set up. I think there's Pharmala, I think could be one, maybe like they're a Canadian manufacturer that's producing a lot of MDMA. That could be the case. But yeah, like this is a big question. I don't know that MAPS is set up enough to send it here for export, right? So we'll see. We will see. But that is something we need to cross. That's just MDMA, right? Like psilocybin. I heard USONA is being a little tight with giving out psilocybin to researchers. So, where can people get it? But that's a really big problem, Kyle. that's probably bigger than just how does the state and territories kind of sort that out on their own, like distribution, like the right kind of storage, all that.
Right. Well, you're thinking MDMA, that definitely needs to come from a lab somewhere. But with psilocybin, if people are reading that and they go, oh, like we can just grow our own and, do psilocybin therapy. How do you regulate and do that? I think that's probably like an issue that they may be thinking about. But I don't know.
Yeah, totally. Like I think, and this is something we should really carefully consider because things are going to be so expensive. And there is a really big profit motive for a lot of operators here, or there will be. The underground is going to be really big and robust. And there's no way to stop that because the economic incentives are just, it's not going to make above ground work all that scalable unless insurance companies can get on board and, buy into healthier people for a really long period of time. Yeah. Like we for sure know that better mental health leads to, lower healthcare costs in general. So, yeah. And, this is going to be expensive. There are some profit motives that people are digging into. So, stuff we got to watch.
Totally. Yeah. Totally. But yeah, it felt like a curveball. I'm just excited to see how it all unfolds. Because, if they do it well and it does make progress, I think that does help kind of like the global narrative, right? It's like we're always kind of waiting for the US to do stuff or this or that, but for a country to kind of move forward this quickly, how does that also impact, laws in other places?
This is a good transition too. So, is it the case? Like, I think most of us in the scene believe that this is going to be revolutionary for healthcare and treatments worldwide. It is going to really change the paradigm of healthcare, mental health care specifically. And I'm of the opinion we have enough data right now. I'm not a regulator, so my opinion matters very little. And, what happens when we see this implemented at scale and we see like a lot more mental health outcomes when this stops becoming stops just being research data and becomes real world data. Like a lot of drugs make it through the FDA and get shut right down.
Right.
Like a couple months later. I think because of long history of use of both MDMA and psilocybin, we have some really good odds here. I think really, really good odds. Yeah. And like this next article here, oh, we didn't flag this one yet. Bummer. There is some methodological issues. We'll try to get into that next time. So somebody really did a good article discussing issues in the research. And I think you and I could do a really good job kind of teasing that apart and giving folks some extra insight. It was a little too careful for my taste, but I'm not the most careful person. So something that got really a lot of attention yesterday was Dr. Chris Timmerman, researcher at Imperial. I think he's a postdoc there. He, I think, was lead author on a paper. So an interesting engineering.com reported on it a little bit. It's a beginner level article.
The paper is called Human Brain Effects of DMT Assessed via EEG fMRI.
Yeah. So we had some really, interesting brain imaging, which I can't do much with brain imaging, but it's helpful for some people to have pictures. Carl Hart did some really good critiques on that in some of his work. But, brain imaging tech keeps getting better. Imperial has some of the best tech on this out there in terms of like neuroscience labs. But it was just kind of interesting to see a lot of this stuff. Did you have any major takeaways from this?
We could read a little bit from it. Yeah, some of the brain imaging stuff goes over my head. This is why we try to get Manesh on to break down neuroscience in layman's term. But so here's a little quote. For the first time, the team of researchers, including Christopher Timmerman and Robin Carhart-Harris from Imperial College of London, has examined the brain activity of participants before, during, and after DMT, simultaneously measuring two types of brain imaging, EEG and fMRI. And then so they had around 20 healthy individuals who voluntarily participated in their study, 2 testing days that were separated by 2 weeks. The first testing day, they received an IV administration, either a placebo, 10 milliliters of sterile solution, and then 20 milligrams of DMT also giving intravenously. The first session consisted of continuous resting state scans, which lasted 28 minutes, with DMT placebo administered at the end of the 8 minutes. And then scanning was over 20 minutes after the injection. Participants laid in the scanner with their eyes closed, wearing an eye mask to prevent eyes opening, while EEG activity was recorded. And then following the scanning procedure, participants were interviewed and completed questionnaires designed to assess the subjective effects experienced during the scan. And then so the second session, same procedure as the first, except participants were audio cued to verbally rate the subjective intensity of the drug every minute in real time while in the scanner. I wonder how that worked. I'm sure there are some people that may have had a hard time with that, but it'd be interesting to see some of those videos. So some of the high level results here, increased connectivity across the brain with more communication between different areas and systems, significantly altered brain areas that were linked to high level human specific functions like language, semantic processing, and imagination. And compared with the placebo, DMT significantly decreased within network integrity of canonical RSNs, resting state networks, with the exception of the salience and the limbic networks. Significant increases in global functional connectivity were found in the SAL, and then the frontal parietal and default mode networks. Additionally, DMT was found to decrease between network segregation, especially in the frontoparietal salience and default mode networks.
Mm. So you might be asking, what the hell does that mean? So got a couple quotes we pulled out. So we believe the present results, and particularly those pertaining to whole brain organizations, such as global functional connectivity, pairwise functional connectivity, and principal FC functional connectivity gradient, now point towards a signature global brain action of psychedelics that is robust, reliable, unique, and revealing, not just of psychedelic consciousness, but of consciousness experience more broadly. So interesting. Next quote here. In the present study, we found that dysregulation of brain activity indexed via reductions of alpha power as well as by increases in gamma power and signal diversity was associated with increased global functional connectivity at the brain's top. Top meaning transmodal association cortex pole sits the upper end of good grief. This is so technical. Like this is, yeah, again, why we have experts come in to explain super technical stuff like this. Yeah. So here's a quote from Christopher, and then we have a quote from Robin Carhart Harris. One increasing popular view is that much of the brain's function is concerned with modeling or predicting its environment. Humans have unusually big brains and model an unusually large amount of the world. For example, like with optical illusions, when we're looking at something, some of what we're actually seeing is our brain filling in the blanks based on what we already know. What we have seen with DMT is that activity in highly evolved areas of the system of the brain that encode especially high level models become highly dysregulated under the drug. And this relates to the intense drug trip. So, yeah. Yeah, dysregulation leading to the models getting all out of whack. Tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And from Carhart Harris, our results revealed that when a volunteer was on DMT, there was a marked dysregulation of some of the brain's rhythms that would ordinarily be dominant. So normal brain thinking and patterns are changed. The brain switched its mode of functioning to something other altogether more anarchic, which will be fascinating to follow up on these insights in the years to come. And I did see some comments on Twitter from Christopher there saying like this is in line with the Rebus model. It seems really compatible with Carhart Harris's work. And like I think people should be proceeding here. Like I have my doubts of, where we're going to end. Like when will utility come? I know there is some utility here, but left us lacking, right? If this money was, I don't know, spent on actually researching the therapy, like perhaps more people would be helped more immediately. But I understand people want to know mechanism of action and how the brain works, right?
Totally. I mean, I think that helps to drive, therapeutic interventions, right? If we know how things work, then maybe we can kind of tailor interventions in different ways. I also did find that it was interesting that there's no correlations between imagery and entities. So I guess we haven't figured out how to map those entities in the mind yet with fMRIs. But they say, well, the study found a significant relationship between changes in global functional connectivity induced by DMT and ratings of intense subjective effects. Few correlations were found between imaging metrics and specific subjective effects, such as visual imagery, entity encounters, and feelings of immersion. So future studies combining neuroimaging with time-resolved measures of subjective experience and/or experience sampling plus extensive within-subject data collection could leverage improvements in data volume and quality for more nuanced of the neuropharmacological analyses. So I think that also is kind of like the $1 million question, right? Does part of the brain, when it gets activated and how these molecules like bind to receptors, does that produce some of these experiences? I was just skimming through some Stan's work a little bit earlier, just preparing for a talk on HPPD. And just always kind of coming back to stuff that Stan was writing about that, like from his perspective when he was writing LSD, Doorway into the Numinous and LSD psychotherapy, that, didn't seem so much of a pharmacological thing with the chemical, right? It seemed that these were catalysts for the unconscious and whatever kind of arose in there. I mean, it was hard to predict, right? So just such a different approach, right? Kind of that depth-oriented psychology approach of talking about the unconscious versus neuroimaging. Can we actually find those parts of the brain that can light up? And can that predict and correlate to certain types of experiences? And wasn't it Wilder Penfield, the neurosurgeon? He did a lot of kind of research on poking the brains, right? And seeing if, certain parts would stimulate certain visions and whatnot. But this is what Lenny said, where Stan got the book title Beyond the Brain was from Penfield, and Penfield's analysis was Mind Lies Beyond the Brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like there's a lot of data that's not being evaluated to inform new models, right? they're just being written off because they're outside of the paradigm that these folks are operating in. And things like this should be taken seriously, because this is why we talk about philosophy all the time. This is why we care about this topic. Like, are we pointing our funds and resources in the right direction? And like, are we perhaps like, would all of our effort be more efficient if it was pointing, more inclusive of data points that are being excluded? And Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolution talks about this quite well. All right, so I only got a couple minutes left here, Kyle, but next one, it's more our speed. Fox26Houston.com, covering South by Southwest, had an interview with Eric Andre, a famous comedian, Toronto born. I think he lives in Toronto, but no, actually, in the interview, he says he lives in California, so he probably lives there now. But it was pretty funny. He's a robust psychedelic user and advocate. His favorite drug is caffeine, though. He did some good challenges, right? Like, how do we challenge? Like, we're all drug users. Like, caffeine is everywhere. Alcohol's everywhere. It's a drug. Like, let's not make a artificial distinction, like artificial category construction just because it's what we were told to do. Let's like take a more realistic view. When asked, what have you tried? He says, one of each. One of each what? And each of one. That's his response. Super funny. Did you watch that clip?
It came across a little too late. I'm just noticing this now.
Yeah. So he says there's not enough psychedelic education. We agree. Psychedelics are incredibly misrepresented in the media. Yeah, totally. Like, we're talking about some TV show last night in my house. Somebody just ate weed and they got really high in a TV show recently, just right off the plant. Like, what is that? Why would you do that? And as a result of this kind of like weird media conversations, like, people have a flat one-dimensional view due to misrepresentation. I think that's a quote from him. And misinformation generally is detrimental to society. And we have to call organizations, institutions, et cetera, when they provide us with misinformation. Like, a lot of this stuff around fentanyl and cannabis, wildly scaring people when they shouldn't be scared. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just thinking about eating weed and just thinking about our inside joke around THCA.
Oh my God. That's a whole thing, everybody. Like, we had some really interesting experiences. I understand their workaround a little better now, Kyle, but I don't believe that kind of stuff is going to hold up in court. And I guarantee some of this stuff's going to get brought into court. I don't know if you saw this recently. A lot of Delta 8 shops are getting busted. So there's actually a lot of raids on smoke shops selling Delta 8, CBG, like stuff that's like concentrated from industrial hemp and put into a more powerful product. Like, there are busts and raids going on. So be careful out there, folks.
Interesting.
Please.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But cool. I'll have to watch this video. I love Eric Andre, and cool
It's
that
only
he
a
was
couple minutes.
out.
It's worth it.
Yeah, it's cool that he's at South by Southwest. And sounds like he's also going to be at the MAPS conference too, which is super fun.
Yeah. I won't even be able to contain myself if I get to meet him. Very few of these people. I'll be like, on one hand, ecstatic. On the other hand, very nervous.
What do you even
reasons.
say? Yeah.
Don't hurt me.
Went to a legalized heroin convention.
Oh my God. I'm more interested in his ranch work. Ranch dressing, legalized ranch.
Eric Andre's comedy isn't for everybody, but sometimes
No.
it's pretty ridiculous.
I don't even want to talk about it most of the time. I get nervous. I'm gonna get in trouble. Anyway, I think that's it for now, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. Check out that Beckley giveaway on our welcome page, psychedelicstay.com/welcome. You still have time to apply for Vital if you want to do that. Psychedelic or vitalpsychedelictraining.com for that. And yeah, we'll be in touch. There's a lot more coming. Thanks for tuning in to Psychedelics Weekly. Thanks, Kyle.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Yeah.